faster decisions. To guide us through this, please put your hands together for our bronze sponsor, Kyle Clubb, the Chief Analytics Officer at Redapt. Get ready for an enlightening session as he shares his insights on making the most of data in a decentralized world. Let's give it up for Kyle, everyone.
Oh, can you hear me okay? My name's Kyle. I work for a firm called Redapt. We've been in business for about 27 years. We do anything from bare metal hardware deployments. We deploy Zoom's data centers to hundreds of millions of dollar AI implementations. Of course, there's a little bit of a backlog for NVIDIA equipment at the moment. And we have a services group. I'm specifically in the Advanced Analytics Services group. So we help and enable companies of all sizes to really get benefits from their data assets. So small companies of one all the way up to companies, enterprise companies like Nike. We partner with Microsoft, GCP, and AWS, NVIDIA, of course, for hardware on the AI space. I really started sort of this analytics journey. Years ago, I started to look at and be asked to, in the M&A space, for mergers and acquisitions for boards before they made decisions to evaluate companies' data assets. So this would be just the core assets as they're stored, and the technology and IP, and their business processes. At first, I started to really look at, what data do they have? How much is it worth? If the board is deciding valuations for M&A and acquisitions, what does that mean for that valuation? And I started to realize very quickly that some of these companies had the most brightest PhDs, the most awesome data and technology, but they really weren't getting value out of it. So I started to realize that the process and how these teams are structured was vastly more important than the data itself. There was a period in my professional career when I would come home overworked. My kids wanted books. They wanted me to read their books. Dad, read me a book at night. And I was tired. I was stressed, this one particular company. And I started asking myself, why? Why are some teams high performing? Why are some teams stressed out? When I looked at these companies and I did interviews, I saw the common theme show up. The ones that were excelling were the ones that tended to be decentralized. When I say decentralized, there really wasn't coercive environment. The top-down approach, a typical org structure, was a little bit fuzzy or didn't exist. Everybody was empowered, understood why they were doing the analytics, and weren't in silos. So I really started to look at that and find patterns. So I wanted to talk about examples through time when I started to look at history. What are decentralized organizations in particular? Why are they different from normal organizations that have a top-down approach? So, the agenda basically, we'll talk about the Apache Indians, some marshmallow spaghetti experiments, and of course, alcoholics. We'll look at all these examples so you understand some of the impact that decentralized organizations and the way they operate have probably impacted your lives. A lot of this comes from a pretty insightful book by an author, Ori Brockman, and it was entitled The Starfish and the Spider. This particular book really took the starfish example and said a lot of these organizations that operate in a decentralized manner are like starfish. Starfish don't have a brain. The data and the sensory feelings that they get are instantaneously acted on. You can cut off an arm, you can cut it in half. Ultimately, it spawns new arms and proceeds like it typically would. So that's interesting. There's no centralized intelligence. The data is immediately processed at its source and acted upon. Spiders, on the other hand, of course, have brains, they have heads. And if you cut off the spider's head, it's done. Starfish are a lot more agile and a lot more adaptive. So he uses that particular author, uses that example, which I see as fitting, and he talks about the Apache Indians. When the Spanish invaded Mexico, as you probably know, they quickly destroyed the Aztec Empire and the Incan empires. It took them weeks, only weeks, to do it. These empires have been standing for hundreds of years. Why did they do it? Because they were coercive environments. They had a king, they had a hierarchical structure, and the Spanish knew exactly what to do, take out the head. So these empires fell relatively quickly. Now, when the Spanish moved north, they found the Apache Indians, which had a completely different culture. Their culture was decentralized. They had no real leader. If you really read about them, their culture has what they call non-tons. These non-tons were really more like spiritual leaders, and they led by example. So if you truly have no leaders, then the best you can hope for is lead by example. So these non-tons were really wise men. There wasn't one, there were many. And the Spanish immediately went after their settlements and what they assumed were the leaders, the non-tons. Well, once you killed one, more would rise. The Apaches adapted. They said, hey, you're attacking your settlements, we'll just become nomadic. And the non-tons decided to eventually fight back. And this was by example. They didn't command them to do it, they just started doing it. And people said, the other Apaches said, look, it's probably a good idea. They know what they're doing, they're wise, we followed their examples in the past, maybe we should fight too. So the Apache culture was very, very different. And the Spanish did not have a way to conquer them because of that. Why? The Apache was quick, they would quickly adapt, they would adjust, and they fought off the Spanish for hundreds of years because of it. So it was drastically different. And a couple of the properties for decentralized organizations that I'm interested in is their ability to mutate and adapt. So I look for firms, and we try to help firms or companies, analytics departments that are siloed, self-contained, to really think differently about how they should be structured. Another example, Bill Wilson. So Bill Wilson in 1935 was basically an alcoholic for 20 years. He didn't know what to do. He really couldn't overcome this addiction. He'd go to the priests. He would go to religious leaders. He would go to sort of doctors at the time and ask for help. And nothing would really work. So he started to piece together a process. So Bill Wilson started Alcoholics Anonymous. This is a 12-step program that has affected society in immense ways. There is no central leader. There's no central core organization that controls it. You can go to meetings, sit in a circle, leave the meetings whenever you like. There's no application process. If you want to start your own chapter in your own circle, you're free to do it. As it stands today, Alcoholics Anonymous is all over the world. You can travel, you want a meeting in Canada, Iceland, Germany, what have you, it doesn't matter. You can find one. That organization has immensely impacted families, children of those families, over the years to a degree that I don't think is really downplayed. That organization has mutated. Now you can have Narcotics Anonymous meetings. You can go to Overeaters Anonymous meetings, and so on. Gamblers Anonymous. So it's important to understand that these decentralized organizations have had huge impacts through society and in your lives, more than likely. You either know somebody who has been to these meetings, who is sober, or maybe yourself as well. Would it have worked so well if it was controlled by a central organization or a CEO? Who's to say? I highly doubt it. Another experiment that you may have heard of. So a researcher named Peter Skillman took a challenge. He said, I'm going to take marshmallow, spaghetti, some tape. I'm going to challenge a group of folks to create a tower where the marshmallow is the highest. So he did this with CEOs, groups of lawyers, groups of MBA students, business students, general people, just random group, and also kindergartners. He did this all over the world, and he would measure in a certain amount of time who did this the best. How was the marshmallow? What's the height? And there were some other objective measures. But, as you would imagine, the group that scored the best in every objective measure were the kindergartners. The worst were the business school students, which you maybe have guessed. The reason for that is not the fact that the kindergartners are smarter, it's the way in which they operate. Kindergartners do not take time discussing who is the CEO of Marshmallow Corp. They don't care. They just start working at the problem. They immediately start grunting and just putting stuff together. They do not waste time trying to figure out who's in charge, who should I ask advice from. Of course, the CEOs, the lawyers, the business school students, especially the business school students, because of a failure in what I believe is academia, is that they are asked to create one solution one time and they better get it right. So when they turn in their papers, or they turn in their projects, they better get it right the first time. And that's bad, because the real world, we need iterations. We need quick iterations, quick failures, and we need to prototype, test as rapidly as possible. One cycle is not enough. If you're familiar with software development, there's a process called Scrum, Agile. We have adopted that almost universally. It used to be more waterfall. Waterfall was a project management style that took and really planned up front. So it's big design up front. Let's predict and control up front as much as we can. That didn't work very well. Somebody came along and said, look, we got to be more agile. We must go through more iterations. We must have a set of norms or rules that we operate. And we have Scrum Agile methodologies, and to some extent, there's sort of a rule book guidelines. But that is widely accepted as the way to do software development today. We do not do that with the organization. The org chart is the epitome of waterfall. It is the big, big design up front. That org chart is not agile, doesn't change very often, and it's really keeping organizations back. And there's a lot to that. So as we consult, obviously I don't go to CEOs and say, hey, relinquish complete power, right? Just give it all up to the organization. And there have been organizations that have done it. Zappos is one of them, probably one of the biggest ones in the United States. Tony Tsai, of course, had passed. When I talked to him, we were, particularly this private equity firm, before Amazon acquired them, I had a chance to speak with him and his philosophies around decentralized organization, which is quite impressive. So Zappos obviously is a successful company. People love working there. And, he did it to an extreme. He literally stepped back and said, I'm going to let this go where it may. So it mutated and it changed at will. So if you look up and you Google it, obviously they adapted it, but they mutated, which what we expected. So decentralized organizations will typically mutate and change frequently to adapt, and that's what we want. Typical org charts do not do that enough. They have these big scale restructures. When they finally get to a breaking point a year or 2 years later, happens all the time. It shouldn't be that way. It should be in smaller increments, faster in response to changing tensions. So back to the example, the students or the kindergartners just had more iterations. They didn't care about the stuff that didn't matter. So there's a lot to learn from kids. They didn't have time to go through the years of sort of, hey, you shouldn't do that. Hey, you need to act this way. They didn't really have time to go through all of that. But they can accomplish great things by the way in which they work. And that's important. Other studies, if you Google this, there's a general study where cities, every time they double, the efficiency per person goes up 15%. So when a city doubles, whether 100,000 to 200,000 or 1 million to 2 million, there are many indicators, economic indicators. Per person, the efficiency goes up 15%. So this could be the number of patents created per capita. That's just one of them. There's myriad of metrics, but generally speaking, 15%. So as cities grow, double in size, 15% efficiency per person economically, the cost of the city itself goes down 15%. It's weird, it's 15%. So when you look at infrastructure, when you look at starting to put people together, generally the cost per person goes down 15% to run the city. So that's interesting. There's nobody that really runs it. I mean, there's a mayor, but there's all different systems in place working together. Nobody completely controls, nobody commands from, like a King Wood to all, everybody down. That's not how cities operate. Corporations and organizations, on the other hand, the complete opposite is true. The larger they get, the more inefficient they get. So there's clues to that. Why is that different? Amazon, Microsoft, these big corporations make a ton of money, and they operate under traditional org structures, so obviously it sort of works. If you can imagine how much more money they would have made if they followed the patterns of how cities operate. They're generally decentralized. They have systems within it that all work together. Again, there's clues there. As I speak with teams, and I have my own consultants that go out and work with our clients, I want to make sure that everybody's happy with their job. Gallup does this survey every year. It's their engagement survey. For the last 20 years or so, the engagement in the United States, the disengaged worker is at 66%. That's 2/3 of all workers are disengaged, which is not good. So why is that? A lot of times, as a human condition, we want to grow, we want to get better. We want to make forward progress. And if you want to know how to do that, grab a Tony Robbins event, I'm sure he'll help you. But I know for a fact, in my team and what I've seen, is that analytics workers are data workers that don't understand what they're doing and aren't understanding why they're solving certain problems, and they've been pigeoned or sort of siloed in a specific task. That's always detrimental. I don't know how many times I've interviewed data engineers or data scientists, and they don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. They don't understand the business outcome, and it's not exciting for them. They're just taking orders. We have to avoid that as much as possible. Specifically, I'm looking at the organization. I can talk about tech. We develop, we can implement technology for folks. We consult, as an analytics as a service or a fractional analytics service. We come into companies, small or big, and we say, hey, look, how can we redefine the way you do analytics? What I typically see at small companies is they operate ideally in this distributed sort of multi-role agile framework. Multiple people have different roles, but as companies grow, over 10, 50, and about 50 or plus, we start to see the fragmentation of departmental separation, where the agile feel has moved away. Things moved towards a waterfall methodology, not for the projects themselves, but the org itself. So one of the first things that we do is we try to tackle that organizational problem, because substantively that is at the core what is holding organizations back. Not the technology, not the individual skills, it is that alone. So the things I go after, system thinking, decentralized organizations have these benefits. I go after systems thinking, the ability to think beyond what you're doing, just this little, taking reporting orders or developing models or whatever you're doing in the analytics space. Understand why you're doing it. Why is everything connected the way it is, and what are the outcomes for the business? If it's a nonprofit, like we work with Make-A-Wish, we work with American Cancer, there could be health outcomes. Whatever those are, understanding why you're there, seeing yourself as part of that system, and making progress. This is vital for these types of teams. Tension is fuel. How many times have you sit in a meeting, nobody talks about what their problems are? There's yearly surveys that are sent out, and some people don't know if they're anonymous, and they fill them out, and they sort of think maybe they're heard. Tensions must be used as fuel. Tensions are workers saying, hey, something's not right. So you want them bad. If I'm sitting in meetings and I'm asking for tensions and I don't get them, something's wrong, because there should always be tensions. There's something not quite right, and everybody can sense it. That should come up. Leaders, managers should be truthful. They should be honest, open communication, always. If you cannot be truthful with your employees, you cannot be present. If you cannot be present, you won't be able to connect. If you cannot connect, then how do you feel anything at all? I've met and talked to so many leaders that seem to not feel anything at all. They must understand that their decisions, their work environment extends beyond them. They spend so much time at work. When you go home and you talk to your children, when your children ask you to read them a book, all of that matters. How stressed you are at work, how happy you are. Influence your workers, make them feel engaged so they can go home and really affect the people that they love. Just a quick demo. How would a decentralized organization change quickly? Well, attention is, here's some roles. We have people in those roles. Attention comes up. Hey, there's a reliability drop in our data or our reports. That's attention. Somebody brings it up. They ask for it to be processed. So there is a set of norms on how to process tensions. I've sit in so many rooms where people talk about tensions, but there's no way to process them and for actual change. So we help organizations do that. And we can go through a quick meeting and a process, and eventually the tension is processed, and it may be the fact that there's no data quality role. So over on the right, the data quality role will be created. I can do this in 15 minutes. We go through an objection round, any objections to this, blah, blah, and we go through it, and boom, you have a new role. The role is empty. Do we have anybody that wants to fill the role? Nope, then we need to hire for it. So there's things that go through, there's a process, but we could do this fairly quickly, and we could do it in small increments. So we don't have to wait for the entire org to finally snap. We could do this in small increments where everybody's tension is being heard and processed, and we've removed the ego as much as we can. The biggest blockers to most successful organizations is your title itself. Stop being so obsessed with it. Fill roles, fill multiple roles, separate your ego from the title, and just get the work done. All right, quick demo. So we partner with Microsoft quite often, or actually a lot. Probably the most mature example of a LLM model is Copilot for Power BI. Copilot for Power BI is now in preview. It is not part of the normal Copilot. I would say this is a one-off because it has to analyze data in a different way. So I made a quick demo last night. I just recorded the video, so I'll narrate over it real quick. So just to set up the context, this is the data. The data has to be cleaned. These models cannot operate on mess. So we still have to spend the time as human beings to go through and say, hey, here's our sales table, here's our customer table. Make sure the columns are called something that makes sense. So think of this example as I have already fed in like spreadsheets, tables of customers, sales, regions, and so on. Is it playing? All right, here we go. So we have customer tables, date tables, facts for internet sales. We call them DIM dimensions. That's dimensional, which is contextual information. So we have a customer table. We have an employee table. We have product table. We have sales table. So this is pretty generic, but it has some pretty good information about our salespeople, our products, our internet sales, our customers, when it happened. So that's what we feed in. But this is really has been cleansed. The columns have nice, beautiful names. The data has been cleansed, and now it's ready for the large language models to process them. So in this particular case, you can see the examples of what the tables look like. They're just tables of data. Now, to make it and put it in this format from the source systems takes a lot of work, and OpenAI will not do it for you. We have to do this. So we do this for our clients. We model reality in a way that the models themselves can work against. So here's an example of a report with nothing in it. So I asked Copilot, and again, this is in Power BI, which is probably the most fleshed out example that you will find today. I simply ask, suggest contents for this report. So it looks at all the backing data, and I simply say, hey, what should this report be about? And immediately it says, look, I found sales and territory information. How about customer segmentation and loyalty, product profitability, call center efficiency, and quality? It looked at all of the tables and said, hey, I could probably give you some nice reports on these topics. So I say, yeah, let's do customer segmentation and loyalty. So I just simply say create. Now I could have edited this to specifically go after certain dimensions, but I'm just going to take what was there, and I hit create. So it asks Copilot, create a page to identify and profile the most profitable and loyal customers based on demographics, purchase behavior, and feedback. I didn't put any of this in. All I did was put the data. I pointed to the data, And I asked it, hey, give me some recommendations on what you think would be valuable. I picked one, and it's going to work on it. And immediately it creates these reports. So in the past, I would have to have report writers that do this. They would have to know DAX in this example, or SQL, which no CEO wants to deal with. But now they can literally just say, all right, give me the data, let me ask some questions, and I'm going to get some reports out of it. Now, is this perfect? No. I can see that some of this may be valuable, but some of these reports may not be. As you can see here, here's a list of customers and their total purchase. So, Jordan here has obviously purchased the most, and so on. So when you click on certain elements of the report, it would focus on that. All of the other visuals will adapt. And this is just general functionality for Power BI. So, you can interact with the reports. You can see sales over time. You can see and click on individual elements. And then, of course, you have filters here. So let this go through. And Copilot's really on the right. So it's really cool. The prerequisite is data that has been formed in a semantic way that the model can make sense of. So at this point, I'm going to ask for what we call a narrative. So once the report is created, I'm going to use large language models. I'm going to ask for something called a narrative. And a narrative will look at the visuals in the reports and will create a narrative and start interacting with you about them. So here, I'm going to pick a narrative, and I'm going to say, hey, describe, I'm going to create a narrative I'm going to say, answers likely that leadership would ask. So it's saying, all right, you want me to figure out what leadership would probably ask you about these reports? I'm going to figure that out, and then I'm going to create a textual narrative to explain what those questions are or maybe answer them. Again, I haven't done any code. I made a few clicks. Most of the work was in preparation of the data, and the narrative will be created. This narrative comes up with all kinds of stuff. Sales also vary based on customer education background. Bashers, which produced the highest purchase. So there's all this insights that's just coming out of here. It's anticipating what leadership may have asked about the data and is giving me really insightful information. Geographically, customers through the United States and Australia have contributed the most, identically to sales, and gives you numbers and so on. And then it talks about other questions that leadership may ask, saying, hey, here's some other questions. Actually, you're missing some of the data that I can use to answer these questions. I can use that, go back, bring in the right data, and then we can start this process. Again, this is a huge time saver. Report writers have spent days and weeks doing this. Here's another page. So you can create another page. If you want to add more visuals, we simply go, grab another page here. Another example, suggest content for this report. So I'm asking, all right, given the data, let's suggest some new content. So we'll create another one. Now let's look at call center efficiency and quality. Or we'll do sales performance. I forget what I picked here. We did sales. So depending on what data is there's call center data. It knows that, finds it, and says, hey, I could talk about this. In this case, we'll just pick sales performance. So before I have profitable and loyal customer reports, now for the next page, I'm going to create ones focused on sales insights. And you can go on and do call center or what have you. So here's some sales comparison information. This was generated by the large language model, specifically Copilot for Power BI here. I'm demoing this one. We could do a lot of this in AWS, GCP, but this is probably the one that's the most fleshed out, that works the best currently on the market. So that's why I picked this one as a demo. Filters are there. You can pick year. You can look at sales information by year and so on. Here I do some more questions, but I ask more specific stuff about drivers. What are drivers for sales? Can you tell me what's driving sales in Germany? And it will go out and go figure out, hey, it seems that this age group, these demographics are probably driving sales or are driving sales for sales in Germany and so on. So you get very specific on what you want, and this is natural language questions that anybody may want to ask of their data. So in the interest of time, I'll close that one out. We have an analytics opportunity assessment, so we have a booth over here if anybody wants to grab a card. You can scan this. We do have Microsoft funding, AWS funding, GCP, and so on. We're a top-tier partner with all of them, so in a lot of situations, you could do these POCs. We can help you get implemented, or if you're a consulting firm, we partner with other firms to help do this for their clients. But we do have access to a lot of potential investment funds from some of the big companies that are in this space to do POCs. So there's free money out there. Just ask us about it. So that'll be it. Any questions? I can go ahead and run up to the mic if you do have any. How much time?
We have time for just one question.
Okay.
Good morning. Charles Hale with Hale Consulting Solutions. You talked about the importance of having clean data, and that's one of the things that we've seen is a real struggle, especially working in the project management space, that you have tons and tons of data, but identifying what is the usable data within it. What's kind of your approach to identifying usable data and providing that clean data model?
Yeah, so just real quick, we have a process, we call it business events analytics modeling. It allows us to go to the business and say, what do you care about? Talk us through a story. Most of the time we use stories for app development. We don't use them for data development, which was a problem. So we actually go to them and say, take us through the stuff that you care about. Let's chart a story. We take that story, and in the project management space, it may be that this project is behind by 4 weeks. It should have closed on this date. These type of stories, we use that to generate those tables that you see to inform the model. Because if you don't make those tables right, it's not going to work as good. So that's the process we use. It's actually, we have templates for it and so on. But it allows the business to tell us the stories they care about. That lets us translate it to the technical specs so we can quickly develop these tables. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Kyle, for those fantastic insights. Let's give it up one more time for our amazing keynote speaker.